My name is Patty E. Yop, 33 years old. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was editing manuscripts, my usual freelance work, the kind that kept the lights on and my mind busy enough not to spiral into memories I didn't want. Mom's voice cracked with tears, something I'd rarely heard in my life, and for half a second it almost worked. That old instinct to sit up straighter and become the daughter they remembered only when they needed something. Patty, please, we need your help. Her breath hitched like she was trying to swallow panic. We're about to lose the house. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen, my fingers hovering over my keyboard as if I could type my way out of what was coming. What happened? I asked, already knowing there would be a story, and in that story there would be an emergency big enough to make my needs small again. The bank, Dad cut in, his voice shaking now, as if fear had finally found a crack in the armor he wore around me my whole life. We've fallen behind on payments. They're threatening foreclosure. We need $60,000 by next week or we lose everything. The amount hit me like a punch to the gut, sharp and immediate, like my body recognized danger before my mind could form words. $60,000 was almost everything I'd saved over the past decade. Every extra editing job, every skipped vacation, every cheap apartment I'd lived in. Every time I said no to dinner out because I told myself I was building security, all of it added up to just over that amount. I know it's a lot, Mom rushed on, catching the silence on my end like it was a cliff edge. But we'll put you on the deed. The house will be partly yours. Please, sweetheart. We have nowhere else to turn. In the background, I heard Sierra before I saw her, because Sierra had always existed as noise in my life, the kind that filled rooms and stole attention without trying. Is she going to help us or not? She called out, sharp and impatient, like the world was a service desk and I was running late. I closed my eyes and it all came back with the kind of clarity that made me taste metal in my mouth. All the time Sierra got new cars while I took the bus. All the times they paid her rent while I worked 2 jobs. All the times they forgot my birthday, but threw elaborate parties for her, the kind with themed decorations and catered food. Like celebrating her was a community event. I need to think about it, I said, forcing the words out steady, even as my stomach tightened. We don't have time, Mom snapped, and the tears vanished so fast it was almost impressive. The bank! I'll call you back in an hour, I said, and hung up before they could drag me deeper into the urgency they were building like a trap. My hands were cold as I grabbed my phone again, not because I didn't know what they wanted, but because I knew exactly how this would end if I walked in unprotected. I called Emmett, my ex-boyfriend turned friend, the one person I trusted to tell me the truth even when it stung. He answered on the second ring, voice low like he'd been in the middle of something important. I need your help, I said the moment he spoke, and I didn't bother with small talk because my family had trained me to live in emergencies, and I need you to be brutally honest with me. 20 minutes later, I was in his office, him in his wrinkled suit, me still in my work-from-home sweats, looking like a woman who hadn't expected to be fighting for her future before dinner. He leaned back in his chair and studied me the way he used to when he could tell I was trying to convince myself of something. You want my professional opinion? He asked. Don't do it. He didn't smile, not fully. You're going to anyway, aren't you? I nodded, and even that small movement felt like signing something I couldn't undo. Then let's protect you, he said, and he pulled out a legal pad like he was drawing a line between who I had been and who I needed to become. We're drawing up a loan agreement, interest rates, repayment terms, consequences for default, everything. They won't sign it, I said, because I could already see Dad's face tightening, Mom's mouth pulling thin, Sierra rolling her eyes like I was being dramatic. Then you don't give them the money, Emmett replied, and started writing. Simple as that. There was something about watching him write that made my chest loosen, not because it fixed anything, but because it made the situation real in a way my parents couldn't twist into sentiment. Lines, terms, consequences, words that didn't care about guilt trips or tears. 2 hours later, I stood in my parents' living room with the document in my hand, the paper suddenly heavier than it should have been. The house smelled like Mom's stress, baking cinnamon and desperation, like she'd tried to cover panic with sweetness, the way she always did when company came. Sierra lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if this was just another family gathering where my role was to provide and her role was to exist. What's this? Mom asked, frowning at the papers like the words themselves had offended her. Loan agreement, I said. Standard stuff. You put me on the deed. I give you the money. You repay me within 2 years. Dad's face darkened instantly, like I'd accused him of something he hadn't done yet. You don't trust us. Would you trust someone asking for 60,000 without paperwork? I asked, and kept my voice level even as my heart hammered, because I knew if I sounded emotional, they'd use it against me. Sierra finally looked up, her expression already bored. Wow, Patty, real nice. They're our parents. Then they shouldn't have a problem signing, I said. And the calm in my tone made Sierra's eyes narrow, like she could sense I wasn't playing my usual part. Mom's hands shook as she read the first page, but not from gratitude, from irritation. This seems excessive. It's standard, I said. Ask any lawyer. What? We don't have time to consult lawyers, Dad snapped. The bank. Then sign, I said, and held out the pen. Or I walk out that door and you can figure something else out. There was a pause, the kind that stretched and sharpened the air. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at Sierra, like she had any authority besides being their favorite. Sierra shrugged, like the outcome didn't matter as long as she got what she wanted. They signed, both of them, right there on my carefully crafted loan agreement. They didn't even read past the first page, too desperate for the money, too certain they could handle their quiet, reliable daughter. I transferred the money that night, all of it. Everything I'd worked for gone in a single transaction. Mom hugged me, crying about how I'd saved them all, and I stood stiffly because her arms felt like a costume she put on when she wanted to play loving mother. Sierra rolled her eyes and went back to her phone. Dad promised they'd start the deed transfer immediately. Later, as I drove home, my hands shook so badly I had to pull over. I stared at the dark road ahead and felt something like grief moving through me, not just for the money, but for the version of myself that had still hoped this would end differently. I called Audrey, my best friend since college, the one who knew how my family operated because she'd watched it happen to me for years. I did something either really stupid or really smart, I said when she answered. Tell me you didn't give them the money, she said immediately, and the dread in her voice made my throat tighten. I did, I admitted, but I got something better. I looked at the signed agreement on my passenger seat, like it was the only solid thing left in my world. I got proof. Proof of what? She asked. That they're going to try to screw me over, I said, and the words came out calm, colder than I expected. I started my car again, suddenly steadier. And when they do, I'll be ready. I was still stupid, but not as stupid as they thought I was. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the fear, something else started to wake up, something sharp and watchful. I told myself I would give them time. I told myself people under pressure make mistakes and then they fix them. But as the days passed, and then the weeks, and every call about the deed transfer came back with an excuse, a delay, a lawyer is busy, a paperwork is complicated, I felt the first thread of certainty tighten around my ribs. They hadn't signed a loan agreement because they respected me. They'd signed it because they believed it didn't matter. And that belief, that casual confidence in my silence, was the first warning that the story was not going to end the way they expected. 3 weeks passed before I decided to make a surprise visit. I had been calling daily about the deed transfer, but Mom always had an excuse. The lawyer was busy, the paperwork was complicated, they needed more time. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own, but together they formed a pattern that made my stomach tighten every time my phone rang. That Sunday afternoon, I drove to their house, determined to get answers. The sky was gray, the kind of quiet afternoon where the neighborhood felt suspended in time. I parked a block away, a habit left over from my teenage years, when sneaking out had been easier than asking permission. Some instincts never leave you. The kitchen door had always been my secret entrance. Muscle memory guided me around the side of the house, past the rose bushes Mom used to obsess over, the same ones she trimmed while lecturing me about responsibility and gratitude. I was halfway up the steps when voices drifted through the slightly open window. I froze. I can't believe she fell for it, Sierra said, her laugh sharp and clear. $60,000 just like that. My hand stopped midair inches from the door. Well, Mom replied, and there was amusement in her voice, the kind she used when gossiping with friends over coffee. She always was the responsible one, our little emergency fund. My heart began to pound so hard it felt like it might crack through my ribs. The best part, Dad added with a quiet chuckle, is she thinks we're putting her on the deed. As if we hadn't already transferred it to Sierra last month. The world tilted sideways. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, like the house itself was pressing against my chest. But what about her loan agreement? Sierra asked. Shouldn't we be worried? Please. Mom made a dismissive sound. It's Patty. She'd never take us to court. She's too desperate for our approval. Dad laughed softly. Besides, we can always claim it was a gift. She's been giving us money her whole life. No judge would side with her. My fingers instinctively found the loan agreement inside my purse. I always carried it with me. A quiet paranoia I hadn't been able to shake since the night they signed it. Now I understood why. I still think we should be careful, Sierra said. She's not as stupid as she looks. Sweetheart, Mom replied calmly. I've been managing your sister's expectations her entire life. Trust me, she'll roll over like she always does. There was a pause, then Mom added casually, Now about that down payment for your new condo. I didn't stay to hear the rest. My legs carried me back toward the street on autopilot. I barely remembered opening the car door or sitting down behind the wheel. The sound of their laughter followed me like an echo trapped in my skull. Emergency fund. Roll over. Gift. I sat there staring at the steering wheel for a long time. Strangely, the panic faded quickly. Not because the betrayal hurt less, but because something inside me had shifted. Clarity. My phone buzzed suddenly, making me jump. Audrey's name flashed on the screen. Hey, she said when I answered. I'm at that new cafe we talked about. Want to join? They planned it, I heard myself say. The whole thing. What? They transferred the deed to Sierra before they even asked me for the money. Silence filled the line. Then Audrey said, Don't move. I'm coming to you. Where are you? Outside their house. Jesus, Patty, her voice softened. Drive to my place now. 20 minutes later, I sat on Audrey's couch, clutching a mug of coffee she had shoved into my hands. She paced back and forth in front of me, like a therapist trying to stop a patient from unraveling. We need to call Emmett, she said finally. No, she stopped. No? I pulled the folded loan agreement from my purse and placed it carefully on her coffee table. Not yet. They stole from you, she said. I know exactly what they did. My voice sounded different, calmer than it had any right to be. Audrey studied me carefully. What are you thinking? I smoothed the paper across the table. You know what the beautiful thing about this document is? What? They didn't read it. She leaned closer. They were so sure I was harmless, I continued. So sure I'd never push back. They signed without reading, and Emmett added some interesting clauses. Like what? Asset disclosure, fraud penalties, consequences if they attempt to transfer property without notifying me. Audrey blinked. They signed their own sentence, I said quietly, and they don't even know it. A slow smile spread across her face. You're scaring me a little, she admitted. Good, I replied, standing up, because I'm about to scare them a lot more. I opened my banking app on my phone and transferred every remaining dollar I had into a new account my parents had no access to. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make sure they couldn't touch another cent. Audrey watched silently. What's the plan? She asked. First, I said, I call Emmett. And then I grab my keys from the table. And then I show them exactly how stupid I'm not. As I drove home that evening, their laughter echoed in my mind again. But this time, it didn't sting the same way. This time it fueled something. You made a mistake, Mom, I whispered to the empty car. You signed my freedom and your sentence. The war they didn't know was coming would start tomorrow. And this time, I wasn't playing by their rules. The demand letter arrived at their house exactly 1 week later. I paid extra for certified mail requiring a signature. Mom signed for it at 10:43 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 10:47, my phone was exploding. I watched the notifications pile up while I finished my coffee. 3 calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, 5 text messages from Sierra, each one more hysterical than the last. I let it ring. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix their problems. Finally, I answered. What is this? Mom's voice trembled with rage. Not fear, rage. I believe the letter is quite clear, I said calmly, using the same neutral tone Emmett used in courtrooms. You have 60 days to repay the loan in full, or we proceed with legal action. Legal action? She sputtered. We're your family. Yes, I replied quietly. You made that very clear when you transferred the deed to Sierra before asking for my money. Silence. Then Mom's voice dropped. You were at the house. The kitchen door was always my favorite entrance, I said. You taught me that. Remember all those times you locked me out? Dad's voice suddenly cut in, sharp and furious. Now listen here, young lady. No, I interrupted, my voice turning cold enough to freeze the room I was standing in. You listen. Another silence. You have 60 days. Every penny plus interest as outlined in the agreement you signed. Mom's breathing became uneven. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Then Sierra's voice burst through the phone, high and panicked. You can't do this. The house is mine. I smiled slightly, though she couldn't see it. Actually, about that. What? She snapped. You might want to check the property records again, I said lightly. There are some interesting discrepancies in the transfer documentation. Another silence, this one heavier. What did you do? Mom whispered. Me? I said. Nothing yet. I paused. But the mortgage company might have received an anonymous tip about potential fraud. What? Dad barked. Funny how quickly banks start investigating when words like forged documents come up. I learned from the best, I said calmly. I glanced at the clock. 60 days, not a minute more. Then I hung up and blocked their numbers. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, but it wasn't fear running through my veins. It was adrenaline. Electric. Alive. The phone buzzed again seconds later. Emmett. They got the letter, he said when I answered. How do you know? Because your mother just called my office screaming about ungrateful daughters and family loyalty. I laughed. Of course she did. I recorded the entire call, he added casually. You're a beautiful man. She also threatened to sue me for malpractice, he continued. Said I manipulated you. What did you say? I reminded her she signed a legally binding document without reading it. And then I hung up. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. You know they're going to fight this, he said after a moment. Good. I opened my laptop and clicked open a folder labeled Family Business. Inside were years of small things I had quietly noticed. Receipts, bank transfers, suspicious donations, odd withdrawals. All the things I had ignored growing up, because questioning them only caused fights. Let them fight, I said calmly. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Later that afternoon, I met Audrey for lunch at our usual spot. She already had 2 glasses of wine waiting on the table. You look different, she said the moment I sat down. Different how? Lighter, she replied. Like you finally put down something heavy. I took a sip of wine. I sent the letter, I said. And? Now we wait. I showed her the blocked call list on my phone. They can't contact me directly anymore. Everything goes through Emmett. She raised her eyebrows. They must be losing their minds. Oh, they are. I smiled slightly. But here's the best part. I opened my email and showed her the message I had sent that morning. Copies of the loan agreement. Recipients, several members of my parents' country club board. You didn't, Audrey whispered. Oh, I did. Patty. Mom has been the treasurer there for 15 years, I said calmly, handling charity donations, event funds. Audrey leaned closer. And anonymous financial questions tend to get attention. She stared at me for a moment, then slowly grinned. That's deliciously evil. No, I said quietly. That's just the beginning. I opened another email. Remember Summer? I asked. The friend your mom suddenly stopped speaking to 10 years ago? The one they said moved to Florida. Audrey nodded. She never moved. I slid the phone across the table. Summer's reply filled the screen. I've been waiting years for someone to finally ask questions. Audrey looked up slowly. Oh my God. Mom forced her out of their social circle after discovering some financial irregularities at their charity foundation, I said. Meaning? Meaning Mom found someone who knew too much. Audrey leaned back in her chair. And now? Now Summer is ready to talk. She studied me carefully. You're really doing this. I took another sip of wine. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They thought watching meant I didn't understand. They thought I'd keep my mouth shut forever. My phone buzzed. A message from Emmett. Your sister's boyfriend just called. Says he has information you need to hear. I turned the screen toward Audrey. She frowned. Think it's a trap? Probably. I finished the last of my wine. But I'm done running from their traps. I stood up and grabbed my coat. This time I said calmly, I'm setting them. The game was changing. And for the first time in my life, I held all the cards. I met Heath at a coffee shop downtown, far from my parents' usual social orbit. The kind of place where nobody cared about country club memberships or family reputations. Just students with laptops and baristas who spelled your name wrong on purpose. He was already there when I arrived, fidgeting. His expensive designer watch caught the light every time his hand twitched. I recognized it immediately. Sierra had bragged about buying it for him last Christmas. With my money, apparently. Thanks for meeting me, he said when I sat down across from him. Make it quick, I replied, keeping my coat on. I have a meeting in 30 minutes. That wasn't true. But people confessed faster when they thought time was running out. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Sierra doesn't know I'm here. That's comforting. His eyes darted toward the door before returning to me. Your parents. They're not who you think they are. I almost laughed. Actually, I said calmly, they're exactly who I think they are. No, he said quickly. You don't understand. He glanced around again like someone might be listening. The house thing isn't the first time they've done something like this. That got my attention. Go on, he swallowed. Your mom's been running this scheme for years. What scheme? She finds wealthy friends. gains their trust, becomes treasurer for their charities or social organizations. He made a small vanishing motion with his hands. And then money disappears. My stomach tightened. Like Summer? His eyes widened. You know about Summer? I know enough, I replied. I slid my phone onto the table and quietly tapped the recording button. Why don't you tell me the rest? He hesitated. Then the words started coming out faster. Your dad helps cover it up through his accounting firm. He moves numbers around, buries things in paperwork. And Sierra... He paused. Sierra distracts people. How? She's the perfect daughter, Heath said bitterly. Charity events, fundraisers, social media, smiling for photos while your mom moves money around behind the scenes. A perfect front, a perfect lie. And you know this because, I asked. His expression darkened. Because Sierra makes the same jokes every time they get away with it. My chest tightened slightly. What jokes? That it's amazing how easy it is to fool people who think rich families are trustworthy. I leaned back slowly. So my family runs a fraud ring. Pretty much. He hesitated again. There's more. Of course there is. They've been using your name on things. The words landed like a brick. My name. Loan applications, property documents, insurance policies. My voice went flat. My signature. Yeah. I didn't react. Didn't blink. But something inside me went very still. Do you have proof? He nodded slowly. Sierra practices your handwriting sometimes. I thought it was weird at first. Then one night she told me it was for family paperwork. My pulse thudded in my ears. And you're telling me this now because... He rubbed his hands together nervously. Because things are getting messy. People are asking questions about the charity funds. People like Summer. Exactly. He leaned closer. And Sierra's scared. That made me smile slightly. Good. He studied me carefully. You're not surprised. I'm disappointed, I said calmly. He laughed quietly. You're scary. I've been called worse. An hour later, I was sitting in Emmett's office playing the recording. His expression grew darker with every sentence. So, he said slowly when the audio ended, your mother has been embezzling from multiple organizations, and my father covers it up. And your sister acts as the public distraction. Looks that way. Emmett leaned back in his chair. This is bigger than a loan dispute now. I figured. We're talking about federal fraud charges. Can we prove it? With Heath's testimony and Summer's statement? He nodded slowly. We can start pulling threads. He turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. These kinds of schemes always leave paper trails. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Summer. Your mother's lawyer just sent me a cease and desist letter. She's trying to shut me up. I turned the screen toward Emmett. She's scared, he said quietly. Good. Scared people make mistakes. That evening I drove past my parents' house. The country club's annual garden party was happening in the backyard, their last desperate attempt at pretending everything was normal. Through the front windows, I could see Mom holding court in her favorite blue dress, laughing with the same women she'd spent decades impressing. But something was different. The crowd was smaller. People stood in tight circles whispering. More than a few guests were staring at their phones. The foundation's financial records had started circulating that morning, courtesy of an anonymous email blast. My phone rang. Unknown number? Against my better judgment, I answered. Is this Patty? A woman asked. Yes. This is Margaret from the garden committee. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I saw the numbers. What numbers? The missing funds from the Children's Hospital fundraiser. My grip tightened on the phone. I think I know where they went. By midnight, I had 3 more calls like that. Former friends, business partners, social acquaintances, all with stories, all with suspicions, all with proof. Audrey came over with takeout and a bottle of wine while I pieced everything together on my laptop. Your mother is like a black widow, she said. What? She spins this web of trust around people, then drains them when they're not looking. And Sierra? Learning from the best. I pulled up another email. Bank statements. Transfers from a youth center where Sierra volunteered. Audrey whistled softly. The golden child has sticky fingers, too. I closed the laptop. So what happens now? She asked. Everything goes to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She blinked. You're serious. But first, I said quietly, I want them to feel what's coming. The next morning, the country club's social media exploded. Members resigning. Donations frozen. Emergency board meetings scheduled. Dad's biggest accounting clients began quietly pulling their business. Sierra called Emmett's office in tears. Tell her to stop, she begged. Tell her we'll pay everything back. It's too late for that, Emmett told her. The truth doesn't stop just because you're ready to confess. Later that afternoon, Summer called again. Your mother just tried to bribe me, she said. How much? Double what she stole. I shook my head slowly. What did you say? I told her this isn't the first time they've stolen from you. My heart skipped. What do you mean? Summer hesitated. Oh, honey, she said softly. There's something you need to know about your college fund. The one that mysteriously disappeared right before my freshman year. I gripped the phone tighter. Tell me everything. What she told me next made the room spin. But it also explained something that had haunted me for years. Why $60,000 meant so little to them. Because it wasn't the first time they'd stolen my future. And it wouldn't be the last lie I uncovered. The courthouse hallway felt like a battlefield. My parents and Sierra stood clustered with their lawyer on one side, their expensive clothes and carefully rehearsed calm, barely hiding the panic beneath. Across the hall, Emmett and I stood together, our stack of documents resting neatly in his briefcase. Between us sat Heath on a wooden bench, hunched forward, elbows on his knees like a man waiting for judgment. He looked like he might throw up. Last chance, my mother's lawyer called across the hall, voice smooth and professional. We can settle this privately. Emmett didn't even glance up. Not anymore, he replied calmly, lifting the court order in his hand. We're past that. Sierra's face went pale the moment she saw the document. Her fingers clutched her lawyer's sleeve as she whispered something frantically in his ear. Mom's posture cracked just slightly. For a woman who had spent her entire life performing perfection, even the smallest fracture looked catastrophic. The bailiff stepped into the hallway. We're ready. We filed into the courtroom. Heath flinched when Sierra hissed the word traitor at him under her breath as we passed. Judge Martinez wasted no time once everyone was seated. We're here regarding allegations of document forgery and financial fraud, she said sharply. The contents of safety deposit box 247 have been secured by the bank. The bank representative stood beside the evidence table. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Proceed. My heart hammered as the small metal box was placed on the table. The key turned with a quiet click. Inside lay stacks of documents, neatly organized in folders. The clerk began reading. Loan applications dated from 2015 to present. Tax documents, property transfers, each one bearing my name. My signature, except it wasn't mine. Objection, Sierra's lawyer shot to his feet. These documents are private family matters. They were subpoenaed legally, Emmett said calmly. And we have an expert witness prepared to testify regarding the forged signatures. All eyes turned toward Heath. He stood slowly, face pale as he approached the witness stand. Sierra's expression twisted with fury. You lying piece of... Miss Sierra, the judge snapped, banging her gavel. Control yourself or you will be removed. Heath took the oath. His voice shook at first. But once he started talking, the truth spilled out like water breaking through a dam. Sierra practicing my signature late at night. Mom correcting her hand movements. Dad notarizing documents that carried forged identities. Templates, Heath said quietly when Emmett held up a sheet of practice signatures. They kept copies so they could recreate her signature whenever they needed it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My mother suddenly stood. We did it for the family. Her voice cracked with hysteria. Mrs. Regina, the judge warned sharply. She was always difficult about money, Mom continued, eyes wild now. Always questioning, always refusing to help. I stood up slowly. You mean refusing to be robbed? Her gaze snapped to mine. You ungrateful. Sierra lunged forward from her chair, but her lawyer grabbed her arm before she could move. Your Honor, Emmett said calmly. We move to freeze all financial assets belonging to the defendants pending criminal investigation. The evidence suggests this fraud extends well beyond my client. No, Mom screamed. The sound echoed through the courtroom. You can't. The house, she cried. The house belongs to Sierra. Emmett calmly slid another document across the table. The deed transfer used a forged signature. The judge examined it carefully, which renders the transfer invalid. Sierra collapsed back into her chair. Dad looked like he had aged 10 years and 10 minutes. Mom just shook her head over and over. No, no, no. Judge Martinez closed the folder in front of her. I've seen enough. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades watching people lie. All assets are frozen pending investigation. She looked directly at my parents. And I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal charges. Dad's voice came out barely above a whisper. Criminal. Identity theft, fraud, financial exploitation, multiple counts. The judge stood. I strongly suggest you obtain criminal defense attorneys. The gavel struck. The courtroom erupted into chaos. As we stepped into the hallway, Sierra's voice shrieked behind me. You've ruined everything. I turned slowly. No, I said quietly. You did that yourselves. Mom stared at me like she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her. And every lie, I continued, every theft, every time you chose greed over love. I met her eyes. I just exposed it. Outside the courthouse, Heath hurried toward me. There's something else you should know. I sighed. What now? The reason they needed your college fund. My stomach tightened. What about it? He glanced around nervously. Sierra was in trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind that requires expensive lawyers to make disappear. Cold dread crept down my spine. What did she do? Ask your mother about the hospital records from 2015. He handed me a folded piece of paper. This is the case number. I stared down at it. The final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed. Emmett appeared beside me. You want me to look into it? He asked quietly. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Not yet. I looked back at the courthouse doors where my family stood surrounded by lawyers and reporters. First, I said softly, I want them to sit with this. To feel what's coming. Emmett nodded. They won't go down quietly. I know. But for the first time in my life, their chaos didn't scare me. Their anger didn't control me. And their lies no longer defined me. The war wasn't over, but I had just won the first real battle. The hospital records arrived on a Tuesday morning. Emmett handed me the large manila envelope with unusual hesitation, which immediately told me whatever was inside was worse than I had prepared myself for. He normally delivered bad news like a surgeon, precise and emotionless. That day, he looked uneasy. Are you sure you want to read these? He asked quietly. I took the envelope from him. How bad is it? He sat down heavily in the chair across from me. Bad enough that your mother paid $500,000 to make it disappear. The number echoed in my head. 500,000. Money that had apparently come from somewhere. Money that suddenly made my missing college fund feel less mysterious. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were police reports, medical files, witness statements, court transcripts that had never reached court, and photographs. As I read the first report, my stomach twisted. The accident had happened in 2015. Late at night, Sierra had been driving drunk. There had been another car, a family. My hands began to shake. What happened to them? I whispered. Emmett's voice was gentle when he answered. The parents survived. My throat tightened. The children didn't. For a moment I couldn't breathe. 2 children. Dead. And my family had buried it. How? I asked. Connections, money, influence. He rubbed his temples. Your father manipulated financial records. Your mother paid officials to alter reports. Witnesses were pressured to stay quiet. And Sierra, I asked slowly. She walked away. No charges. No trial. No consequences. My future had been sacrificed to erase her crimes. Does she even remember? I asked quietly. Emmett hesitated. According to Heath, she jokes about it sometimes. My chest filled with something colder than anger. It wasn't rage. It was ice. I reached for my phone. What are you doing? Emmett asked. Calling someone. Patty. Detective Roberts, I said when the line connected. I have information about a cold case from 2015. Everything moved fast after that. By evening, police cars lined my parents' street. Red and blue lights flashed across the neighborhood like sirens announcing the collapse of a kingdom. I sat in my car at the end of the block and watched. Officers walked up the driveway. The front door opened. Mom appeared first. Then Dad. Then Sierra. The moment the handcuffs clicked around Sierra's wrists, Mom screamed. The sound cut through the night like glass breaking. Dad just stood there, gray, silent. My phone rang. Audrey. It's all over the news, she said breathlessly when I answered. Are you okay? I'm outside the house. You want company? No. I watched the police car doors close. I need to do something first. When the police cars finally drove away, I stepped out of my car and walked toward the house. Mom saw me through the front window. She rushed to the door and yanked it open. How could you? She shrieked. Your own sister. I stepped inside slowly. How could I? I repeated. The house smelled the same. Cinnamon. Desperation. 2 children died, Mom. Her face twisted. Well, we had to protect her. With my money? I asked quietly. My future? Dad sat in his old armchair like a statue carved from regret. You don't understand, he muttered. I turned toward him. I understand perfectly. I pulled out my phone. A recording began to play. Sierra's voice. Laughing at a party. Joking about her lucky escape. Mom's knees buckled slightly. Where did you get that? Heath recorded everything. I looked around the living room. Dozens of photos of Sierra covered the walls. Graduations. Birthdays. Awards. There were barely any of me. You can't fix this with money anymore, I said quietly. The district attorney has everything now. Mom grabbed my arm. We'll hire lawyers. No. I pulled away. The house is mine now, legally. Their heads snapped up. You have 48 hours to move out. Mom's voice rose to a shriek. You're evicting us? After everything we've done for you? A bitter laugh escaped me. Everything you've done for me. You stole my college fund. You forged my identity. You took my life savings. And you used it all to protect a murderer. Dad lowered his head. Mom's face twisted with fury. Oh, we're your parents. No. I opened the door. You're just people who had one daughter they never wanted and another they never controlled. Outside, reporters had already begun gathering. Cameras flashed. Mom ran out after me. All I ever wanted was your honesty, I said loudly enough for them to hear. You traded it for Sierra's comfort. Then I walked away. Later that night, I sat in Emmett's office watching the news coverage. Sierra's mugshot filled the screen. The accident. The cover-up. The bribes. The lies. The district attorney wants to make a deal, Emmett said quietly. What kind of deal? They'll reduce Sierra's charges if she testifies against your parents. I nodded. Let me guess. She already agreed. Immediately. He handed me a set of keys. The house. They felt heavier than I expected, like holding proof of everything that had broken. What happens now? I asked. Emmett shrugged. Now you decide what justice looks like. I stared down at the keys. Justice. Revenge. Freedom. They all felt strangely similar. But something still lingered in the back of my mind. One last piece of truth. One last secret. And I had a feeling the house was still hiding it. The house felt different when I walked back in alone. Empty. My footsteps echoed across the hardwood floors as I moved through the room slowly. The movers had already taken most of my parents' things the day before. Furniture was gone. Decorations were gone. Even the framed photos that once filled the walls had disappeared, leaving pale rectangles behind like ghosts of the lives that had been staged there. I walked upstairs past the bedrooms, past the place where Sierra had once thrown parties when our parents were away, past the hallway where I used to sit as a kid, waiting to hear if someone would notice I had gotten home from school. They rarely did. In my parents' bedroom, one piece of furniture remained. Mom's vanity. The antique one she had always insisted was too heavy to move quickly. The mirror was dusty now, reflecting a stranger standing in a house that used to feel like a prison. I opened the drawers one by one. Empty. Makeup gone, jewelry gone, every trace of the life she had built around appearances, except for the bottom drawer. It stuck halfway. I pulled harder. The wood scraped loudly before finally sliding open. Inside was a single object, a leather-bound journal. My phone buzzed as I picked it up. Audrey. Have you seen the news? She asked when I answered. Sierra took the deal. She's testifying tomorrow. Let me guess, I said quietly. She's blaming your parents for everything. She would. I flipped open the journal. Mom's handwriting filled the first page. The date made my chest tighten. The day I was born. I have to call you back, I told Audrey. What's going on? I found something. I hung up before she could ask more. The first line stopped my breath. I can't love her like I should. My hands began to shake as I kept reading. She's not Talon's. Every time I look at her, I see my mistake. The words blurred. Talon agreed to raise her as his own. We will never tell her the truth. My heart pounded. Soon we'll have our own child, a real family. The journal slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. Suddenly, everything made sense. The birthdays they forgot, the coldness, the favoritism, the quiet distance in my father's eyes. I wasn't just the less loved daughter. I was the secret. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the detention center. Mom sat on the other side of the glass in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect appearance stripped down to something fragile and small. I found your journal, I said. Her eyes closed slowly. So now you know. Who is he? I asked. My real father. She shrugged weakly. Does it matter? The words burned through me. It mattered enough for you to punish me my entire life. She leaned forward. I gave you a good life. You gave me trauma. My hand pressed against the glass, separating us. Every time you chose Sierra. Every time you stole from me. Every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough. My voice trembled slightly. It was because I reminded you of your guilt. She looked away. I tried to love you, she whispered. No, I said. You tried to erase me. I stood up. But you failed. I met her eyes one last time. Because I'm stronger than your shame. Outside the detention center, I called Emmett. I'm selling the house, I told him. There was a pause. Are you sure? You fought hard for it. I looked out across the parking lot as the sun began to set. It's not a victory if I keep it, I said quietly. It's just another chain. That night, Audrey sat with me on my balcony, wine glasses in our hands. The city lights stretched out below us. So what now? She asked softly. Now I write my own story. I showed her the real estate listings on my phone. Small houses, gardens, Places far away from my family's shadow. And Sierra? Audrey asked. She'll serve time for vehicular manslaughter. Less than she deserves, I admitted, but more than she expected. And your parents? Facing fraud charges. Their reputation is gone. Their friends are gone. And that's enough. Audrey studied me quietly. Is it? I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who waited for love that never came. No, I said. But it's justice. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad. The first contact since the arrests. I should have been better. Not because you weren't mine by blood, but because you were mine by choice. I failed you. I'm sorry. I showed Audrey. Are you going to respond? She asked. I stared at the screen for a moment, then deleted the message. No, some bridges need to stay burned. The next morning, I met a real estate agent at the house. As she talked about market value and staging, I walked through the rooms one last time. In my old bedroom, I found something carved into the window frame. A small heart. My childhood mark. I traced it gently with my finger, remembering the girl who once believed someone would love her. I'm sorry, I whispered to her reflection in the glass. But I love you now. And that's enough. Downstairs, the agent called my name. I walked out the front door without looking back. Soon the house would belong to someone else. Let them fill it with better memories. My phone rang. Emmett. The district attorney has one more question, he said. What? Do you want to give a victim impact statement at the sentencing? I looked at the moving truck pulling away from the driveway, the last pieces of my old life disappearing inside it. No, I said. I've said everything I needed to say. I got into my car. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. Ahead of me, the road stretched open. Empty. Not an ending. A beginning. Some people say revenge doesn't bring peace. They're wrong. It brought me something better. It brought me home to myself.